Knew we were coming.
That's lobby. Lobby for your lobby gobblers. Here.
Well, today we're back in Rossendale and we're going to have a look at the last pit that ever worked in Lancashire. We're going to go up to Hilltop Colliery and me and Tussie's going to walk around there and share a few memories. Hilltop is here at the top of Sharneyford Road in Rossendale, Lancashire, on the Lancashire Yorkshire border. So Hilltop Colliery itself originally was a brainchild of the NCB. It was the only national coalboard pit sunk in the Rossendale Valley, although they did modernise Deerplay. And this is the old colliery access road that comes off the Sharneyford, the Bacup to Todmorden Road at Sharneyford. And Hilltop Colliery was actually here. This area you can just see there is where the drift gantry stood, and the drifts came down this way. Now that worked on until 1966 when it closed, and Billy Clayton reopened Grimebridge Colliery. Grimebridge, they went under the Grimebridge Colliery core name. Billy Clayton reopened Hilltop Colliery, drove 2 new drifts in 1997. Now I say on the video 1996 and I'm wrong. I must remember it's a World Cup year. And Grimebridge itself closed in 1996 and Hilltop was started in 1997. For a start, the idea was to drive a drift straight down this direction and meet up with the old Hilltop and then work all this area across the crop edge. This area here had already been worked years ago by the open cast. Now if we look just next to Hilltop there in the clough, we have the old Car and Crags Green Clough Colliery and the old tram road that goes down there. Now that was worked later on in the 1960s. Actually, it lasted longer than Hilltop because it was worked as part of Sandy Road Colliery up until 1966. Later on in 66, then Hilltop had closed, but it was situated on this side of the hill, and they used the old Car and Crags drift as a drainage level. That's a different view. There's the old Hilltop where the drift gantry was, Billy's pit, and this was where the Car and Crags was. You can see the old tram road coming down here, and then there's an incline down towards Cornholme. Now if we zoom out a little bit, give a better idea of where the coal actually was. Hilltop worked the Union mine. There's the Union and the Upper Mountain, but it was the Union mine that they worked. And the Union mine cropped out down here on Sharneyford Road behind what is now the Astronomy Centre, which was, of course, one of Templey's pipe works. And the crop edge actually runs right across the hillside up towards Sandy Road, and then right across the top and down where Car and Crags is. Now, the area itself was originally worked by drifts down here, going back, way back, and drifts up here up into the 1700s, actually. But the Todmorden Moor Colliery was driven next to the Astronomy Centre, working to the rise to try and get the coal there, which dipped away savagely from it. So a lot of coal was lost. And then in 1850, they drove a new drainage level down at Clough Foot to enable them to get coal at a deeper level. Nevertheless, they had to leave an awful lot of coal because of the angle of the dip, which meant that the coal board could come in and sink Hilltop Colliery in 1949. Now, as well as driving the new Hilltop Colliery, the National Coal Board also did a lot of modernisation at the old Deerplay Colliery. Deerplay dated from 1895, part of a venture of the Pickup family, Brooks and Pickup. Well, Pickup had gone by then, it was Brooks, but they went under the name of the Deerplay Colliery Company. And the Maiden family managed the venture for them for years. And Deerplay was developed again in the late 1940s by the Coal Board. They modernised it, put a modern drift in, and the idea was then to work all this coal under here, left by the old Deerplay Deerpley Colliery Company and meet up with Hilltop that were being driven down from here. So this is the area that they were going to work under, all under here, and the two mines actually met up. When the Thieveley Colliery opened as a private mine, it opened round the corner of the hill there and worked round the back to meet up. Well, they never did meet up, and the intention wasn't for them to meet up, but they had the same patch of coal to go at. Thieveley Colliery licensed mine and Hilltop Colliery licensed mine. So we'll have a good look round and show plenty of old photographs.
This is Hilltop Pit Road. Where Tussie stood near there, that's where the bus shelter used to be. I remembered it as a kid. It's like a 50p piece, like a great big pillbox. So you could shelter from all sides of the wind up here. One of the highest pits in the country it was. This is June, flaming June, and I wish I'd brought me hat on Derpley Moor by a hat. So Hilltop was driven around about 1949, mostly by men from Dicky Brigg, Moorfield Colliery in Accrington, where Eric Markham had been a bevin boy. And at the time, the Coal Board invested a lot of money in short life drift mines around the East Lancs, Rossendale and Burnley area. There was Hilltop, which was the only one the Coal Board sunk in the Rossendale Valley. Although I think the fire brigades sort of argued whether it were actually part of Yorkshire or part of Lancashire. Straddles both really. They modernised Derpley, and then in Burnley they sunk Fence 1 and 2, Fir Trees, Thorny Bank and the Salterford pits that were all sort of short-lived drift mines. And the intention of Hilltop was to, well, they reckon there were 4 million tonnes of reserves here, and the idea was to immediately, or within 10 years, get 1 million tonnes. It was from the Union mine. Old Meadows had worked behind me from Bacup, that had worked all the way up, that had been going since the late 1840s, and the Derpley Fault runs between, which separated them, and to the dip, well, to the other side of Hilltop were the old pits up Jules Gate. There was the old Torberney Moor collieries, and a lot of the older pits from down Jules Gate had also tried to get at some of the coal, but they'd got to the only depth that they could. It's very hard because of the wind, this. It's going to be spoiling it a little bit. So a lot of the older pits from down Jules Gate, they couldn't access the deep coal. They could only get up, well, as far as the top of Green Clough really, because like the coal dipped about between 1 in 4 and 1 in 6, and they had to access it via drainage levels. So the Hilltop coal and what Derpley went for was what the old pits couldn't get. It was at depth. So that's when they turned their attention here to say they reckon there was 4 million tonnes, and the idea was originally to get 1 million tonne. And for a start, Hilltop was only expected to get about 350 tonne a week. So they put 2 drifts down. The main intake drift, that went down at 1 in 4 for 370 odd yards. But the tailgate, the fan drift, went down about 1 in 1. It really was steep, that. And for a start, they worked the coal by mechanised pillar and stall, using duckbill loaders, short wall cutters, Dissenton cutters, and then they went on to AB15s with short long wall faces, hand filling, cutting and hand filling. So that time period of the late 40s, early 1950s was quite exciting really, because the Coal Board did invest an awful lot into these areas. So if you were a young man growing up at that time, looking for a good job, perhaps you weren't academic but you were clever, and don't forget there was all sorts of trades in them days with mechanisation, electronics, mechanics, surveying, everything that went with technical coal mining in them days. There was a fantastic career ahead of you. And my father, well, he was born in 1927, and he for a start got an apprenticeship at Bracewell and Priors in Bacup as an as an electrician really. He was an electrician, and then he went to work on the Haweswater Aqueduct, which was a tunnel that brought water from Haweswater up in the Lake District down to Manchester. And my dad, like many other locals, worked on the Huncoat to Bury section. But then when he left before that finished, under a bit of a cloud I think, but anyway he came to work at Hilltop. He came to work as an electrician here, and Tussie's dad came here as well. He was a young man. So for young men willing to work hard and get stuck in, there was a fantastic, it looked like there was a fantastic future for them. And at Hilltop, it employed over 100 men. I can't remember how many it employed at its peak. Deerpley had been nationalised and modernised, and that was also employing a lot of people as well. So there were kind of exciting times in the coal industry. And Hilltop were at the Union seam, the Union mine, which was about 4'6", which was the amalgamation of joining of two seams. There was the Lower Mountain mine, which was usually about a yard, got known as the Yard mine, and the Upper Foot mine, and they came together to form the Union seam. But sadly the quality of the Lower Mountain deteriorated a little bit with the Upper Foot meeting it. But it caused a lot of interest to a lot of geologists where the actual line of Union was, and you could see the line of Union in the old Meadows pit and across the old Tooter Hill pits. And you got what came with the Upper Foot was the bobbers. They're in another video, and they're big ironstone. Well, they could be big, they could be little, but they're ironstone nodules. When you hit them with a shearer or a cutter or just a windy pick, boy, did they take the end off your pick blade kind of thing. Then in 1964, they introduced proper power loading at Hilltop. They brought in a shearer, proper Anderson Boys shearer, and extended the faces to 200 yards. But at the time then, there was problems. They said there was no trouble at Hilltop. It was safe as far as keeping open is concerned. But the shadows were cast on the others. Grimebridge had closed, and there'd been a lot of upset with men wanting to go to Old Meadows and the Old Meadows men not wanting them. Say Grimebridge had closed, it were Grimebridge and Broadclough really. So that really just left Old Meadows, Deerpley and Hilltop after 1964. And Hilltop, even though it had been all that money spent, I've got it written down. I will tell you how much money they spent on bringing the shearer in. It only lasted another 2 years, and in January of 1966 Hilltop finished, it closed, that was the end of it. So it only lasted what, 15-16 years, which was probably its intended lifetime, and that's how long most of those short time drift mines lasted. Deerpley went on for another 2 years to 1968, and my father got transferred to Deerpley, and in 68 that was it, finished. And my dad went on, well, my dad went to the cotton mills then. He didn't fancy Bankhall because it was a gas house, and he didn't get on with the electrical engineer at Apton Valley. But he ended up at Apton Valley in 1975. The cost of developing Hilltop though, in the initial stage, in the late 1940s, early 50s, when Hilltop was running, it actually made its investment back in the first 2 years of production. It was very productive, and many times it broke its own production record, and it was the top of the area league table for quite a while as well, production wise. We'll get into that later. So it's interesting that Hilltop originally was at the stage when all that investment was being made into the coal industry, and it had a future in the 1950s. The future didn't last long. There was 17 pits in the Burnley area around about 1950, and 10 years later, well, there was one. Yeah, well, there was two in 1970, and then Bankhall closed, and that just left Apton Valley and a couple of private mines. And Rossendale had a good resurgence of private mines. There was Jimmy Cropper, who opened at least 3 private pits. Across from us, we're going to have a look at that today, although it's going to be on another video. We've got the East Lancashire Brick Company, which opened Sandy Road again and used the old pit that was next to Hilltop as well. And then in the 80s you had quite a resurgence. There was 3 or 4 private mines opened up in the 1980s. Billy Clayton obviously had opened Grimebridge up in 1978, reopened it. That had lasted until 1995, although it had closed through financial difficulties on 2 occasions. It was like a phoenix out of the fire. But he came to Hilltop in 1996 and got the licence for here. So it's quite becoming, really, in a way, that Hilltop finished coal mining in Lancashire. When it finally closed, it was the last pit in Lancashire to close, and we'll talk about that later on as well.
We're somewhere over there.
I'm sure it was further down. Well, could be wrong.
Back drift.
What we were, I think we're way up as we'll see. You could be right. And the drift's lower down, I'm sure. But I could be wrong. What? Up here? It was 1996 when I first came, when Billy was starting, and Clay Coal Company had been after the licence for this, and obviously they hadn't got it, and the brig had shut finally in 95, and he finally got the licence for here. And as the pictures that you're going to see, that tippler, I've got a photograph of John Nuttall putting that tippler in place. I think Mark were lowering it down with a machine. And that was the pit top that we built the gantry up there. Originally, all the top was taken off, all the surface stuff was taken off, leaving just a great big hole and you could see the coal. Not just the coal, there was an old board, an old wire going down. There was old workings here that weren't supposed to be here. See, before Hilltop, the older Hilltop opened, they'd open cast this, and as soon as the open cast finished, they drove the new Hilltop drift, as they knew, the NCB drift, about 1949. But the open cast workings had stopped here, and it's possibly for these old workings that shouldn't have existed. And there was an old shaft, and Billy found a Y-shaped piece of wood at the bottom of the shaft with a groove in it. It looked like they'd used that as some form of temporary headgear. Well, the first job, like I said, it were all filled in. They'd opened it up and the coal were there, and then we built this. The shed was here, and that is where the hauler was. We've got a picture of that, and the tippler. There weren't enough room under the tippler, so you couldn't get the loading shovel under the tippler. So you had to shovel the coal away. But this was the shed, this was the top, and that's where the first drift was. I've got a picture of my father sat in a tub there when my father come up. So this was the first drift going down there that we put in, where Tussie's stood there, and you could see the coal. It were all bared off to the coal, and there was an old working coming up from these old workings that weren't supposed to be here. So this was the main drift, the idea. I said that's where the coal actually cropped out. And there was an old roadway in there. In fact, I came across here one night with me then stepson, and he said, "Hey, I feel dizzy," and there were a load of black damp coming out of here. There was, you need to kill the door with it, like, eh? So one morning when we were ready to start coiling, there was me and young Billy, and picture that splashed all over the internet, which is my picture, is Billy starting off that drift there. And we got 9 tubs out, that's all we got, and then we hit an old board coming across, and we had to carry on down and hit another old work coming across, and then we just missed the shaft, and then we found the old water level, which was about that wide, and they'd left about 9 inch of top on and left some bottoms on. I don't know how on earth they'd managed to turn a shovel. But some of the old works that came up that we found, they were driven nearly at full coal height, and you could see in the side where there were little shells where they put the candles on. But it wasn't supposed to be here, it was supposed to be virgin coal, and there's no records of them. So that drift didn't last long, and then we put one in a back drift to the side.
I only ever seen that running once.
Did you? Yeah. Well, our return drift that we put in, you see where all them cupboards and everything are tipped?
Yeah.
It'll be about there. And that's where the winch was, and a little winder at the back. And originally, the first return drift we were going to put in was kind of behind us. We've got some photos coming up of it here. And young Billy started it off on a lovely sunny afternoon in his tank top, again starting the drift away. And we didn't get down that far and took a work across that direction. John Nuttall took a work that way. And I think I carried on going downhill, and he oiled into an old work, coming up again, one of the old workings. And I remember going along, and I put my head into where he'd oiled into it, and it was like sitting in the dentist chair, you know, where you get the gas, and it kind of staggered on back across the level again. It was full of black damp. But anyway, one Monday morning we came back, and that drift didn't exist anymore. It took a massive weight and just totally collapsed over the weekend. And we see the haulage down there from the old original Car and Crags colliery. That was working in the late 1840s. I haven't found much out about it. I know somebody knows, but they're not telling us. It was on townly land, and later the Cliffordshire Coal Company worked it. We'll do a proper video on it on a better day when I'm over here a bit sooner. The Cliffordshire Coal Company were up there in the 1930s or 1940s, but only employed 3 or 4 men. And a tunnel was put through into the upper mountain. I don't know if they worked that, but the pit was reused from the 1940s on by the East Lancashire Brick Company, Sandy Road Colliery, that went down on Flower Scar Road, and they basically worked all the coal that was left there at Car and Crags. A very old working area. Like Tussie was telling us, a place he found where it went back to the 1700s, and you go on the map from about 1780 and it shows workings over Flower Scar, coal workings, and I've got newspaper adverts of them trying to sell or let the lease for the pits on the crop edge that goes across the Jules Gate, and that's about 1795, saying that Rochdale Canal is easy to get to and it's beneficial. And they're not just trying to sell the coal leases, they're saying what else was there. There was iron, alum, there was a copperous works where they used parites and trying to turn that into iron. And we know that from the 1300s they were working iron on the other side on Jules Gate, and when you look at the section of the Sandy Road coal, there's ironstone nodules at the top, and the coal itself is sat on a band of ironstone. So they put some very long drainage levels in there because the angle of the coal is about 1 in 6 dips away. So that was the trouble. That was also the trouble here for the old man. All they could do was drive drainage levels in from the valley. A lot of the valley's been filled in now with N&R's tip, and then they could drive along the level and then work back up to the crop edge. And at Car and Crags they did that, and then they drove a new level through stone at a deeper level to get even more coal. But the East Lancashire Brick Company, Spencer's, came in from the Flower Scar side and used this to drain their workings. Well, that's for another story. A couple of old pick blades. Pick steels here, and the windy picks, or guns as they call them here, call them picks up at Alston way. These are there, and there came a time in the year 2000s where they were going to stop us using these. They said we had to get them tested. This was up at Alston. I think Billy got away with it. We had to get them tested. It's going to be 300 quid to get each one tested, to tell you that you could only use it for 15 minutes a day. So they came out with some really fancy ones for us to try. We had something like this Guinness up at Ale. Great numb things that they'd use that channel tunnel and that. And they weren't going to give you white finger, but you'd have pulled every muscle in your forearm trying to make a living. And then a delightful machine like this. Who went to school to invent something like that for a bloke to use?
When compared to that.
When you can use one of them.
I went down south. Bob Oil. Sorry, Clive.
No, you won't. Go on.
I went with Bob Oil wagon and I moved down south to pick that up. And it were actually picking it up on way back from dropping something off. Forget what it were, but that went up one neck of trailer. Straight back up the hill. The hellfire. Crack spent up here, Clive. Chaps. Might be a generator, Clive. There were bosses, Michael, I think you recall. Robert were it. Stu Mongo.
I was just thinking about that one. We had an aluminium handle one, like that at Brig. We had a couple at Ale and all, and the trouble is you get a burr on there, you'd end up with a cut on your hand and keep pushing on it. So this now really is the end of coal mining in Lancashire. People might tell you that Parkside was the last pit in Lancashire shut down and that's what they want. Well, it's history for them to say, but it wasn't. It was Hilltop. It's like saying that Kellynham was the last pit when it wasn't. It's a good story, but it's not true. So Hilltop, well, I wouldn't like to say when it shut a couple of years ago. Originally, Billy got an initial license for 15 years. And the idea was to work the patch that was left by the open cast between here and the old Hilltop, and they did haul into the old Hilltop where all the duckbill loader pillars were left. But at the same time, well, actually in the 1980s, Billy Holt had opened up Thieveley Colliery, and he'd run that for a few years. Sadly, it had to close because of certain things. It wasn't a good time in the coal industry at all. But in the 1990s, Big Brian Stanworth and Rod Thackeray, they reopened Thieveley. So, like the old days when you had the old Hilltop and the old Deerplay working together and they were actually joined underground, the end of mining up here, you had the new Thieveley Colliery working along the crop edge towards this direction and Hilltop working towards them. But they never met their potential, really. It's sad. But this is where Lancashire mining ended in the 2000s.